Good day at Coping with the Loss of a Pet. This session is offered through NL Health Services, the mental health program. My name is Jackie Butt, and I'm a social worker in the role of Provincial Groups Coordinator. This session is offered as part of our Wellness Wednesday series, so we do offer this session periodically live. However, we're also providing a recording for people to be able to watch either as an addition to attending a live session, or if you're not able to attend our live session, or maybe you have someone that you think would benefit from watching the session along with you, and you can have the time to do so at your own pace. As we get into this session, I just want to take a moment before we start to encourage you to take care of yourself while you're attending. That means you can pause the video at any time to take a break and come back to it. Maybe you might want to stop and write down some of your emotions and your feelings as you're listening to the information we're about to share. Whatever helps you to be able to work through the feelings and work through your own experience as you're listening to the information, that's all acceptable. So I just want to encourage you to do that if you feel like it would be helpful for you. As we're going to discuss, coping with the loss of a pet is really a complex situation for a lot of people. Pets are not just animals in our life. They have lots of meaning and lots of significance for us. For many people, pets are their beloved family members, and they give a lot to us in our wellness and in our day-to-day living. So this slide shows some of the meanings and the impacts that a pet can have on our life. Pets can provide us with unconditional love. Many people with their animals and their pets, it's one of the few places that they may experience unconditional love in their life. And so this can be very impactful and meaningful to people. Pets can be quite funny at times, and they can do silly things and can bring joy and laughter into our life. We often can experience joy not only with our own pets, but watching videos or looking at pictures of other people's pets, so they can be very helpful in bringing that laughter into our life. Pets can also encourage us to be physically active, getting us out for walks or running after them or playing with them, so that physical activity can be very helpful for us. They also can be really helpful in helping to ease feelings of loneliness. Sometimes isolation can be people's experience in their day-to-day life, and so pets can be companionship that's very meaningful. They also can be helpful in providing a sense of responsibility, giving us something that we feel we need to take care of, and can also in that way add meaning and purpose to our lives. They can help us have a social connection, connecting with other pet owners and sharing stories, or sometimes as we're out walking pets or being around animals, it can help us have a way we can connect with other people. All of these things and many more besides can help us to relieve stress. And stress is something that we all experience in life. So having a pet can be one of our ways that we cope and relieve our feelings of stress. And then also pets can help us add structure and routine to our days. In mental health, sometimes when we have extended periods of time without structure or without routines, that in and of itself can contribute to some struggles related to mental health. And so having that structure combined with a sense of responsibility really can help people with their mental health in being a pet owner. So I share these points just to validate the important role that pets can have in our life and in our families. And when we lose a pet, we lose sometimes the way we get these needs met in our day-to-day life. So when we lose a pet, many feelings are present. And when we look at the feelings that people often identify when they lost a pet, this is some of the feelings that often get expressed. So I'm going to encourage you as you're listening to this to take a moment and just think about the feelings that you may have as you're grieving the loss of your pet. You may experience some or all of these things. Sometimes we can have a whole combination of things, not just one feeling at a time. So some of the common feelings that people identify, of course, are grief and sadness. There can be tremendous sense of loss related to the things we just described and the things that a pet can bring into our life. We also can feel anger. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the session, but anger is another emotion that's really common and not to be minimized or to feel is wrong. Depending on the circumstances of a pet's loss, there can be anger that can come up around that. We also might feel some guilt, again, depending on the circumstances of how our pet has passed, feelings of guilt, or maybe wondering, was I a good enough pet owner? Did I provide the care that was needed? Did I give my pet a good life? Sometimes these feelings and thoughts can arise as we go through the grief process. We may also feel emotions of confusion, overwhelm. We may even feel numb. Maybe sometimes there may be too many emotions or too much pain that we might feel that our body does a protective reaction of helping us to shut down some of that temporarily so that we can work through and get through things that we need to. So numbness is also a common feeling that people might experience. And there may also be fear. This is by no means an exhaustive list of emotions that can be present, but it's some of the more common ones. And you can, again, as you stop and maybe pause this video to process how you may be feeling, you might identify some other emotions. Overall, we just want to help people to understand that any emotions you experience are valid and real and are not to feel that they are not important or that you shouldn't feel those things. When we go through any type of grief and loss, the overwhelm of emotions can be really challenging to deal with. So we also want to start this session by looking at what grief is. This might sound pretty obvious, and it might be something that many of you already understand, but we want to make sure that we're starting from a solid foundation as we go through this session. And so starting with just understanding grief is important. Sometimes when we go through difficult things related to our mental health and our emotions and our coping, I think that it's helpful to acknowledge that sometimes we may intellectually understand things. We may have intellectual knowledge that we've gained through learning and through life, but sometimes when we're going through difficult times, we don't always apply that intellectual knowledge to our emotional experience. And so while we're struggling with the loss of a pet, we may understand that grief is possible, but we may not really connect that to what we're going through in the moment. So being able to pause and just understand and apply the things that we know about grief to what's happening to us right now can be helpful. So we want to just start by acknowledging that grief is a normal and natural response to the loss of someone or something. Sometimes when we think about grief, we start with thinking about the loss of a loved one through a death, and we usually think about a person. But when we think about grief holistically, we can understand that grief can come from any type of loss. It doesn't even have to be a loss through death. It can be a loss of a job, or it can be related to a move or the ending of a relationship. So grief is a common emotion that we experience from any loss. When we're talking about grief through death, we also, again, want to acknowledge that we can grieve many types of deaths, not just deaths of like an immediate family member or a friend. We can experience grief from even more distant losses, and of course, as we're going to talk about today, from the loss of a pet. Grief is something that's universal. We can't go through life, unfortunately, without being touched by grief. And when we talk about someone who is grieving, we say that they are in a state of bereavement. So bereavement and grief sometimes can be used, interchangeably, but bereavement is specifically grieving around the death, loss through death. So when a person we love dies, it's natural and express grief. And when that happens, we usually expect and receive comfort from friends and family. But although people can often feel the same feelings of grief when they lose a pet, sometimes what we experience is that that grief is not acknowledged by other people in the same way. So a big part of our focus today in this session is to talk about how the grief of losing a pet is normal, and it's important and really essential to grieve that loss, the same as you would grieve any loss. That's not to say that other types of grief are not also important and valid. All grief is important and valid to acknowledge, but we also want to bring to the forefront the knowledge of grief around pet loss. When we think about grief, a lot of people have heard about the stages of grief that were identified by Elisabeth Kübler-Ross. And on your left side of your screen is those stages of grief that she identified: denial, anger, depression, bargaining, acceptance. However, what we also now know more is that we don't go through those stages of grief in a linear fashion. It's not a smooth, simple process. Usually people experience grief more like the picture on the right, and it's a real tangle and back and forth, up and down and all around. excuse me, experience that people have. So when you think about your own grief, you may be expecting the picture on the left, but what you're experiencing is the picture on the right. And when we don't know that the picture on the right is actually more normal and typical, we may feel there's something wrong with us. And when we feel like our own grief is not normal, or it's not right, or we're not doing it the right way, or we're not feeling things in the right way, then that layer of judgment and feeling something's wrong can actually compound and magnify our grief, or can contribute to us experiencing some struggle in working through the grief. When we look at grief, we want to understand that grief impacts us in many, many different ways. It's not just one particular way that we're impacted by grief. Grief can affect us physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and socially. So when we look at the physical aspects of grief, we want to be able to acknowledge that grief happens in our bodies. So we do experience physical symptoms of grief in our bodies. I'll go through that a little bit in more detail after this slide, so I'll hold off on a little bit more of that one. When we look at the mental or cognitive impacts of grief, many of you may have noticed that you are not able to process or think things through in the way you typically would have before you experience the loss of your pet. We may experience memory loss, we may experience thoughts that are like more foggy or difficult in concentration. We may have difficulty making decisions. And we also may have thoughts around the emotions that we identified earlier, thoughts around like guilt or anger around the loss of our pet. The emotional impacts are also very, diverse, and can be things such as feeling disbelief, can maybe feeling more worried and more anxious than you typically would have. If you think back to all of the things that pet ownership provides or a pet gives us in our life and our family, when we lose all those things through the loss of a pet, that would impact our emotional well-being. So we may feel overwhelmed or numb, as we talked about. We may have more mood swings, and we may feel emotions like anger and resentment, and any other emotions that we might be able to think about. So we might overall feel like we're on a bit of an emotional roller coaster. And even when we're not directly thinking about the loss of our pet, we may just feel overall in our day-to-day life that we're more emotional, or may have more difficulty coping and expressing our emotions. When we think about spiritual impacts, sometimes with the loss of a pet, we may start to question our faith or our beliefs. We may start to feel like things are feeling purposeless, or we may have lost some sense of our meaning and identity in life. And so this can be quite upsetting and shocking for people, because they may not expect this type of loss or this type of experience in terms of spiritual impact. And finally, there can be social impacts on the grief of losing a pet. So we may not have that opportunity that we had of going out for walks with our pet, or we may not have that connection with other people. We may want to even avoid other people that we associated to our social life with our pets, or avoid having conversations with people who may talk about their own pets because it's too painful for us. So it can impact our social life. Also, if you think back to or connect back to the physical impacts and the emotional impacts, we may be feeling so overwhelmed that we may choose to withdraw and move back from our social connections and our supports, because we may be feeling that we're not coping in the way we want, or that we might be feeling judged by other people. So social impacts can come in lots of different forms. So now just to speak to a little bit more of the physical impacts in our body, because sometimes we may not connect these physical sensations that we're experiencing with the fact that we're grieving. So grief does affect our body, because there is a strong connection between our mental health and our physical health. So when we're grieving, we may notice we have more physical pain, which can include things like muscle tension or headaches, or just overall body pain. We may also be more at risk of illness, because our immune system may be impacted by the stress and the emotions that we're going through. We may have difficulty eating and lose our appetite, or may have digestive issues, stomach pain, stomach aches, things like that. We also can have a loss of energy and feel we have less energy to do things, and we feel tired more often. This can also be connected to or related to sleep disturbances. So we may, excuse me, experience more trouble getting to sleep or staying to sleep, or may also on the opposite side be noticing that we're sleeping more than we normally would. Back to the mental impacts, the cognitive impacts, we may experience memory loss or brain fog. And we also may experience other physical sensations like racing heart or shortness of breath. Those things could be related to anxiety and fear that we may feel as a result of the loss of a pet. And just overall, our body kind of letting us know that we're not feeling the same, we're not feeling okay. So then again, grief can impact our brain, our thoughts, because it can affect our ability to concentrate, to make decisions. We may find that we're not able to locate things or think clearly in our day-to-day life. And so as we're trying to function and carry on our day-to-day activities, whether it's work or school or conversations, we may be feeling like that we're not able to perform in the way we normally would. So again, as I'm going through all of these impacts of grief and the impacts of losing a pet, I want you just to think about your own experience and if you can relate to any of these things, if you notice any of these symptoms in your own self, or you can also pause and just take a moment to reflect on how you have experienced your own grief. What are some of the symptoms or the impacts that you've noticed in your own grief journey after you've lost your pet? So as we've already said, pets are not just pets. Pets are very, very important in many of our day-to-day lives. They can be a member of our family. They can bring companionship and love and joy. They add structure to our day. They keep us active and social. They help us overcome setbacks and challenges. For many people, when they look back on the ups and downs of life, their pets may have been with them for many of those ups and downs and been a companion to them and a support to them. And again, overall, they can give us a sense of meaning and purpose. This is really, really significant. People who may not have pets may not understand all of these roles that pets can play or all these things that pets can give us. And so when we lose a pet, all of these parts of our life can be impacted. So again, as we go through, even though this is a recorded session, I do want you to take some time to reflect and understand your own experience better. And you can think if any or all of these things are part of your experience of losing a pet, which of these points you might be able to relate to. So when we look at the grief of the loss of a pet and compare it to other types of grief, there are some challenges that are unique when it comes to losing a pet. And this slide here identifies two of these things. One is an idea or an awareness of what's called disenfranchised grief. And the second thing is the potential presence of feelings of guilt. Of course, these things can be present in other types of guilt, but they're particularly common and particularly understandable in people's experience of grieving the loss of a pet. So disenfranchised grief is a word that's used to describe grief that isn't fully acknowledged by society and even sometimes by us as the person who's experiencing it. We may feel like we don't have a right to the intensity of our feelings or the impact of the loss that we're experiencing. So we ourselves might have our own disenfranchised grief. We may not be acknowledging it to ourselves, but also then as we go about our day-to-day experiences of grieving, we may encounter this from other people in our life where they don't understand or acknowledge the loss. And they may expect you to, excuse me, be over it or just carry on with your day-to-day life as if nothing really significant has happened. So this lack of validation of the grief may add to the challenges in navigating the journey of loss. So the loss in and of itself is already challenging, but then the fact that it's not validated or understood or supported can also then magnify the challenge. And then when we talk about feelings of guilt that is sometimes present for people as they're grieving the loss of a pet, which can complicate things and make it harder, there can be guilt around many different experiences. Some pet owners might have, this might not be relevant to everybody watching this video, but some of you may have experienced thoughts of, I should have done more. So sometimes if there's an accident or an injury or an illness, we may think maybe I should have done that extra test with the vet, or maybe I should have, hung on a little bit longer and paid for that medication, or maybe I should have been there when my pet died. Excuse me, I apologize for my cough. But we may have these thoughts about many different aspects, whether it's around how your pet died or around their actual life as they were living. For some people, there is an experience of pet loss that can come with the decision to have to make a decision to euthanize the pet. So this can also be guilt-inducing for some people, because they may, in having to make that decision, kind of can tie back to the thoughts of should have done more, or the feelings of responsibility. But just that's a hugely difficult decision for a pet owner to make. And even if intellectually we may feel it's the right decision and have all the evidence to support it, the emotions of feeling guilt can still be there nonetheless. We also may have feelings of responsibility for the loss. Sometimes there may be things that have happened that couldn't lead to this around the loss of a pet. So for example, if an animal is normally an indoor animal and it got out of the house somehow and maybe was injured and that's how it died, there could be a sense of like, oh, I shouldn't have allowed that to happen, or I should have prevented that. So sometimes the way a pet dies can lead a person to feel like that it was something that they could have done to prevent it. All these things can also be present, or many of these things can also be present in other types of losses and other deaths, but they are more frequent in terms of loss of a pet. So feeling responsible in some way, even if the facts don't back it up, or the facts maybe show that there's parts of things that may have been happening, but the sense of responsibility might be heightened, and maybe feeling of over responsibility doesn't really fit the facts. And another part that can contribute to feelings of guilt is the lack of closure. So sometimes you cannot be with your pet when it dies, or you may not have been ready for your pet to die, and you may feel like there was not an opportunity to fully get to say goodbye, and that can lead to feelings of guilt. So all of these things can compound and magnify the struggle we may have as we're coping with the loss of a pet. If we get stuck on any or more than one of these things, it can help us to stay stuck, or make it difficult for us to move forward. So one of the things we'll talk about later is how to move past these feelings of guilt and over responsibility. So one concept that's also important to think about or to know about when we're looking at grief and your own experience of grieving the loss of your pet is to understand what is complicated grief. So we do want to normalize that grieving the loss of a pet is actually okay, and that you are normal and it is healthy to take some time to grieve the loss of a pet. And this can be, for some people, weeks and months, and maybe even longer for some, depending on your life experiences and the circumstances of your pet's loss and the relationship you had with your pet. So we want to really encourage people to see your own feelings as normal, and something that you can and will be able to work through with time and with healthy coping skills. At the same time, we also want to flag or point out the idea of complicated grief. So that is when the grief is very intense and it lasts longer than what would normally be expected, and it's also impacting your day-to-day functioning. So just to say though, like when we say longer than what would normally be expected, typically in our society, we don't really allow an adequate amount of time for grief overall. And that's probably even more so for the loss of a pet because of the disenfranchised nature of the loss. So there's not really a hard line of what is a normal amount of time. Again, as I said, it can vary from person to person and situation to situation. But you do really want to allow yourself a period of time to go through your grief. If you're months and months into grief and you're not able to function daily, and you're not doing the things that you need to do to kind of get by. Maybe you're not attending work regularly, or you may be missing a lot of work, or maybe if you're in school, it's impacting your performance in school. If it's causing you to withdraw from social connections and things like that, then this is some of the flags that we want to notice, and we'll go into those a little bit more a little bit later in this session. So complicated grief is what we want to pay attention to, while at the same time, when we're going through what we would call a typical grief, we do want to be able to allow that to have its time and to run its course. And when I say run its course, it doesn't mean that the grief is then over or goes away, but we come back to a new baseline where that loss becomes acclimated and integrated into our day-to-day life. So it's not about getting to the point where we forget about our pet or we no longer miss our pet, but that we're able to have that missing and that memory of our pet and still feel the sadness of it, but be able to move forward and continue to live our life. So when we talk about complicated grief, though, again, just to really illustrate what that looks like, in case any of you may be wondering about either yourself or maybe someone else in your family who's also coping with the loss of the pet that you are experiencing. Some of the signs of complicated grief is that the grief is persistent, again, lasting a longer period of time, and not really much relief in the day-to-day living with the grief. The presence of intense yearning and longing and sadness is there. It's usually accompanied by persistent thoughts and images, or a sense of inability to accept the loss. So the thoughts and images can be around thinking about how your pet died, or imagining your pet in pain or suffering, or also, again, the opposite of being unable to process that it's actually happened and it doesn't feel real. Some moments of these things, again, are normal, but when it's persistent and pervasive, then it becomes more concerning. So we all can experience with the loss of a pet, sometimes forgetting that the pet is no longer here. We may come home at the end of the day and be shocked again that the pet's not there greeting us as we enter the door. Or we may automatically go to get food for the pet and forget that we don't have to feed our pet right now because it's no longer with us. So these momentary forgetfulness episodes are normal, but when it's persistent, then that's more concerning. And again, sometimes having a thought or a painful image around your pets and their passing is also normal, but when it's persistent and causing a lot of upset, then that's more concerning. Also, in complicated grief, we may start to avoid situations that serve as reminders of the loss. So maybe if we had particular places we would go with our pet or particular activities, we start to avoid those things, which can lead to then isolation and loss of enjoyment in other ways. We may also be reminiscing a lot about our pet, so having difficulty letting go of things that maybe remind us of our pet. We may start to lose time or lose track of things by sitting and remembering or reliving memories and experiences with our pet. And people who have complicated grief often feel shocked or stunned or emotionally numb, and they may also, again, start to isolate and estrange themselves from other people. And as we talked about earlier, for some people, or for many people, pets can add to our sense of meaning and purpose in life. So when some people lose their pet, they may feel a diminished sense of self. They may not feel that they know who they are or have a sense of that purpose anymore. So the more central a pet was in your life in terms of giving you sense of meaning and purpose, this may be something that someone may struggle with if they have complicated grief. Excuse me. Some of the symptoms of complicated grief kind of flow from the information that I've just shared, but just again to really highlight them so you can pay attention to them in yourself or other people. So there'd be intense sorrow over the death. There'd be a constant rumination, which means kind of reliving or thinking about your pet, an inability to accept the loss of your pet, sense of numbness or detachment or bitterness over their passing, their death, a loss of meaning and purpose in life, difficulty enjoying your life and carrying on your normal activities, a belief that you could have prevented the death, and feeling despondent and thoughts of suicide especially would be concerning. So if you notice any of these symptoms in yourself or others on a persistent basis, or after quite a bit of time after the loss, then you might want to take some action and seek some additional help and supports to help you work through and process the grief. Just a little note on children and pet loss, and also seniors and pet loss. So if any of you are supporting a child who's also grieving the loss of a pet, it's helpful to think about that this is often children's first experience of loss. As parents or as caregivers or even family members and friends of children, we can do one of two things. One is that we can over shelter children and try to use euphemisms or like stories to prevent them from experiencing the pain of the loss. On the other hand, sometimes we do the opposite and we over magnify the impact and feel like our child is going to be irreversibly damaged from the loss. So either one of those extremes of reactions can sometimes be problematic for the adults to engage in. So we want to find somewhere in the middle where we can talk to children who've experienced pet loss and explain to them in age-appropriate ways what's happened, and allow them to take steps to grieve that they need to identify. So being responsive to what your child is showing you that they might need. So if they want to talk about their pet, if they want to get a stuffed animal that reminds them of their pet, if they want to have a little funeral for their pet, whatever they might identify, being able to respond to that in age-appropriate ways, and explaining the death of a pet in factual ways and fitting with your own beliefs and your own values, I guess, around what death and loss mean to you. On the other hand, we also don't want to think that children are not going to be able to get over the loss, and so we don't want to be, you know, constantly checking in or reminding them of it or reading things into their behavior more than what is necessarily meant by it. So children are resilient and they are able to overcome the sadness, and they may speak about their pet, you know, for quite a while and bring up their pet in different situations, and just being able to respond as that happens in a way that provides comfort and information that they can understand. So just to kind of be prepared to help children cope in their own ways and know that they will be able to get through, and how we respond to them can impact that in a healthy or in a more challenging way. And then on seniors and pet loss, we also want to make note. So if you yourself are a senior, you can think about this for yourself as validation for what you're experiencing. Or, excuse me, if you're supporting a senior who has experienced the loss of a pet, it's really helpful to think about some of the special dynamics of that. So for some seniors, as we looked at the different meanings that pets can provide to us in our life, not to generalize to all seniors because this can happen at any age, but there may be some more common experience that pets are a comfort and companionship for seniors. Sometimes seniors have also experienced other deaths and losses, so the loss of a pet can be an experience of what we call cumulative grief, where it's another loss on top of other losses. So in grieving the loss of a pet, it may bring up other grief and loss that people have experienced. So that loss of companionship can lead to increased feelings of loneliness, can also take away from some of the structure and routine that seniors may really you know, enjoy and need, the sense of fun and laughter, the happiness that a pet can bring, the increase in isolation from not having that pet. So all the things that we talked about in terms of the meaning that our pets can have in our life are experienced by seniors, but maybe also may have a little bit of a deeper consequence because of the life stage. The other thing that may be unique to seniors is that there may be less ability to think about the option of having a new pet. So sometimes for some people when they lose a pet, at some stage of their healing process, they may make a decision about whether or not they want to get another pet. But for seniors, they may feel less able to get another pet because they may be aware of their own mortality, and maybe that they might not be able to see a pet through till the pet's loss of life or the end of life. And they may worry about like what would happen to my pet if something was to happen to me. So that decision to get another pet may be less available to them, which can compound some of the loss and the grief. So having those conversations with loved ones in your life that may be seniors, and just allowing them to talk about their grief and the meaning of the loss to them is really important, and maybe making extra care to address the losses that come with what is taken away from their pet no longer being with them. So for example, if their pet was a big part of their enjoyment in day-to-day life, you may want to help your loved one, your senior loved one, to find new ways to experience that joy in their day-to-day life. So when we've talked about in this session so far, some of the impacts and the things that our pets bring to us, I just want to again create an opportunity to pause as you're watching this video to encourage you to think about what's one word that captures what your pet provided to you. So it's just taking a moment of validation for yourself to acknowledge the role that your pet played in your life. Again, there might be more than one word, but if you had to think about one thing that sums up the biggest thing you got from your pet and what you are now missing from your pet. You can take a moment and pause and just think about that. And if you want to journal a little bit more than one word, then you also are welcome to do that. So knowing that our pets bring so much to our life, and that there is a natural grieving process that we need to go through, we've also talked about the idea of complicated grief. So we want to acknowledge some of the things that are red flags or unhealthy coping mechanisms that we may fall into. So depending on where you are in your grief journey, if you're already well into it and weeks and months into it, you might want to stop and think about if you're doing any of these things. Or if you're earlier in your grief journey, you may want to really create a little reminder or a caution to yourself to avoid these things. So these things can be a sign of complicated grieving, but also engaging in these unhealthy coping mechanisms can also escalate or create difficulty in grieving. So it can kind of be a cause of difficult grieving or a symptom of. So either way, they're like things we want to pay attention to. So substance use, it would not be considered a healthy coping mechanism for grief and loss. Substance use in the moment can sometimes take away painful feelings, give us a chance to escape or numb out. But when we turn to substance use to help us in grieving, what usually happens is we just prolong the grief, and we sometimes can add extra problems on top of or in addition to the grief that we're already experiencing. So we just want to be careful. It doesn't mean that people can't, have a social drink or, engage in their own recreational substance use that they may have already had, but increasing use or using substances to help us cope would be something to look out for. If we're isolating, we also want to pay attention to that. So if we are spending a lot of time alone, then that's a red flag that can be concerning for us. So think about your own typical, pre-loss behavior. Not everybody is extroverted and is around people all the time. So think about what's your typical baseline, and if you're withdrawing from people or situations more than you normally would have. However, even if you are a more introverted person and maybe are not typically around people a lot of the time, you may want to increase your connections for a period of time, or be especially mindful about seeking out connection and support, because your typical baseline of quiet or alone time may not be ideal in when you're grieving. Doesn't mean you can't be alone ever again. Like, this is not all or nothing, but sometimes we do need to have some alone time to process and feel things, but too much alone time where we can ruminate and get lost in memories and not experience enjoyment can add to our suffering. The other thing which you've already kind of acknowledged is not allowing time to process our grief. So we're saying to ourselves, like, I should be over this by now, or I shouldn't be feeling this way. We can use excessive distraction, like on screens, or a technology can be part of this. So if we are having the belief that we should be over things, or we should get through it quickly, that in and of itself can be an unhealthy coping mechanism. So allowing ourselves time to feel our feelings, process the loss, talk about the loss is really important. If we're neglecting our personal care or our physical health as we're grieving, then that's also a sign to look out for. So if we are going days without eating properly or taking care of our hygiene, if we're not engaging in some activity, or maybe we're not going to doctor's appointments that we need to go to, or following up on any medical issues that we have, then that's also something to be concerned about. And also we have also on here risk-taking behaviors. So sometimes in the intensity of emotions, we may engage in more risk-taking behaviors that we wouldn't normally. So this can be things like spending money that we can't afford. Maybe we're just looking for a distraction from the pain, or some kind of temporary enjoyment or a sense of thrill. We may drive more recklessly, could go back to the substance use and using more substances. So risk-taking can come in various forms. So just paying attention to, again, like, are you doing things that are probably having some potential consequences that could lead to more problems? Because then we would have new problems to deal with on top of the grief that we're already trying to work through. So now we're going to move into strategies for coping. And so again, when we look at these strategies for coping, some of these things are probably not going to be completely new or things you've never heard of before. But again, when we're going through intense emotions, sometimes our intellectual knowledge doesn't always connect to our emotional processing or into our behaviors. So we can get so consumed by the emotions that we don't actually do healthy things to help us work through them. So this list is something I'd like you to think about as we're going through, and just maybe acknowledge if you've already done some of these things, or if there's things that you haven't tried that you think would be possibly helpful. Even if you're not sure if they'd be helpful, you can try them out and just see how they feel. So by attending this session in and of itself, you're already starting to do the first one, which is acknowledging that your love for your pet was true and significant, and that your loss is valid. Seeking out this session and acknowledging the feelings that you're having to come to this session is somewhat already this first step, but it's not just a one-time thing to do once. It's something you need to attend to and allow yourself to experience, excuse me, on a regular basis as you continue through the grief journey. So it's kind of meeting yourself with the same care and compassion that you would give to other people, or you want other people to give to you. So when you notice the emotions of grief coming up, whatever they might be, it doesn't only have to be the sadness, it could be the anger, it could be the fear, it could be the resentment, it could be the overwhelm. Whenever those emotions arise, just knowing that they're there because you are working through the loss of your pet, and the love that you had for your pet was meaningful and valid. The next thing is to remind yourself of the fact that you're worthy of time and space to grieve. So again, creating time and space to grieve. Sometimes in the busyness of our day-to-day life, we just kind of like, we're grieving while we're doing other things. So sometimes actually creating little windows of time, and we'll talk about this a little bit more as we go through the next parts, because some of these are about how you might create that time, or what you would do in that time and space to grieve. But actually giving yourself permission to create that would be a piece of coping. You also want to remind yourself that you're not alone. It can feel very isolating and lonely to go through grief, but you are not alone in your experience of loss. When you're looking at your own particular loss, your own particular pet, you may not connect to anybody else that's grieving in the same way that you are, or maybe there's other family members or friends that are also grieving your pet that you've lost. But for many people, they might feel like that they're grieving alone. And it's really important to remind yourself that the experience of loss and the experience of grief is not something that you are wrong to do, and that in that way you're not alone. And where possible, this kind of ties down to number 5, you do want to try to access your support system. So even if people are not feeling the grief in the same way as you, being able to reach out to people and talk through your feelings and share the impacts of your loss is really important. Sometimes we feel that nobody will understand, and then we bottle things up and we keep things to ourselves, but we also may not always give people the chance to understand. So you can just check in with yourself and see if that may be relevant to you. Number 4 is to create your own rituals. So this is going back to how you can give yourself time and space to grieve. So you may want to create rituals for yourself. It could be a one-time thing, which we'll talk about in a slide in a minute. Or it could be even daily rituals, like maybe you might have a picture of your pet and you might spend a moment every morning or every evening just, kind of feeling the connection to your pet, even though they're no longer physically with you. So creating little rituals to help you process your grief. When we think about the death of a person, we have societal rituals of funerals and wakes and things like that. We have often a grave, a site to go to and things like that. And when it comes to pet loss, there is becoming a little bit more, but it's still not probably common or the norm for there to be societal rituals. It doesn't mean you can't create your own. And as I said, we'll kind of identify some potential ideas for that in a minute. I already talked about number 5 of accessing your support system. Sometimes you might have to seek out new people that are not maybe part of your day-to-day life. But nevertheless, it's really important to find people that you can share your feelings with. And you can also seek your own personal ways to explore your grief and express your emotions, which then ties into number 7 of being open to journaling, photography, art, anything that helps you to release and express your feelings. So the important thing when you're going through grief is to be able to listen to, identify, acknowledge, release the emotions that you're experiencing. If we think about how we show up for a friend when they're experiencing something, we listen, we create time for them, we may sit and have a cup of tea, we may offer them support, and we just often offer like a shoulder to lean on. So in a way, we can think about how can we do that for ourselves? How can we talk with ourselves? How can we listen with ourselves? How can we express to ourselves? And sometimes we minimize the importance of that in our coping. But one of the ways that we first can, even before we can express to other people, sometimes we need to express to ourselves. And then number 8 is also that we can be a support to others experiencing similar disenfranchised grief, or another word since we use ambiguous loss. So loss that's not always recognized. So supporting others, and when you've gone through the loss of a pet, and you are working through it, you may be able to really uniquely be able to understand what someone else is going through. And that goes back to then number 3, reminding yourself that you're not alone. So being with other people, you also can get that sense of connection for yourself. And probably one of the more important, or one of the most important things on here is to take things one day at a time. When we're going through any intense emotions, including grief, sometimes what adds to our struggle is thinking about all of the future moments of the loss. So we think ahead to tomorrow, next week, the holidays. And so what happens is we're bringing in the coping with all those future experiences into this one present moment right now. And that's really overwhelming and makes things way more challenging, because sometimes this moment right here, right now is already enough. So when we think about taking things one day at a time, it doesn't even mean always one day at a time. It could be just one moment at a time. It could be 1 hour at a time, even 1 minute at a time. So if getting through this day feels too challenging, you just need to get through this moment. So try to be taking care of yourself and processing things that you need to process in this one moment. So just not feeling like you have to deal with it all or figure it all out at once. Going back to the slide about rituals, or not the slide, but the point around coping for rituals, there's lots of different ways that we can create rituals to acknowledge the loss of a pet or remember our pet or to connect with our relationship with our pet after they're no longer physically with us. The ideas here on these next two slides are not the only ideas that are available, but these are some ones that have been common or maybe easy, relatively easy or accessible for people to do, but don't feel limited by these options. You can certainly be creative and think of new ideas or other ideas that would make sense for you and for the relationship you had with your pet. But here's some things that you might want to consider. Some people get their pets cremated, and when they have the ashes, they might want to spread the ashes somewhere special. It could be a special place you went with your pet or somewhere that your pet loved. It could be on your property, or it could be at a park, somewhere that is meaningful to you and or your pet. So spreading the ashes somewhere. Some people want to keep the ashes in their home, and that's also an option. Some people may even, it may not get their pet cremated, but they may want to bury their pet somewhere that's meaningful to them, maybe under a tree in their yard, or somewhere that's, you know, a nice place that they would go back to if they want to feel close to their pet. Then connected to that, or as a separate type of memorial, you could plant a tree or a flower in memory of your pet somewhere, whether again it's in your own property or somewhere else. So having somewhere that you can have a monument or memorial for your pet can be a positive thing in helping you to grieve and acknowledge their importance in your life. We may also want to create a memory box where we put special things that were important to our pet. So it could be a favorite toy. It could be maybe sometimes people might have like some things that their pet used to wear. It could be a picture of their pet. Anything that was special to you or reminds you of your pet, you can put in a memory box. So this would be different than like the complicated grieving that we described earlier of keeping like a lot of things around your house and, you know, constantly touching or holding those things. This would be not throwing them away, but putting them in a box, and you can take it out when you need to, or at maybe special times if you feel inclined to, but you still are keeping those things as a memorial to them. Another thing that people might do is, whether it's with ashes or not, is to create a piece of jewelry or a memorial item that they can memorialize their pet in. So it could be a necklace or a ring. So you can think about if that would be something helpful for you to do. Some people get paintings or sculptures or plush animals created to represent their pets. This can be helpful to have as a visual memory. You also can simply use a photo, which is the last point here, having photos or sharing photos of your and memories of your pet on social media, or even just simply having a framed photo that you put somewhere in your house that you can look at your pet. Maybe even it's a photo of you with your pet that you brings back happy memories and positive feelings for you. And as we've already mentioned previously in this session, writing about your feelings would be another way you can create a memorial. So you can write a letter to your pet or about your pet, saying the things that you wish you could have said or you'd like to still say to them. You can combine this with a type of funeral or memorial service for your pet, or something you can just do on your own. And also connect this as the option to write an obituary for your pet. So we think about some of the things we do to acknowledge other types of loss through death and allow ourselves to have those same experiences when it comes to the loss of our pet. So just being able to, again, to normalize the loss and know that it's okay to do things and give yourself permission to do what feels healthy and positive for you to honor the relationship that you had and what your pet brought to you in your life. And as we go through all that, it's really helpful to realize that the love that you had for your pet and the love that they had for you never ends, and you can carry that forward with you into your future. And thinking about the memories and the connection that you had and the positives that that animal brought into your life. So holding on to those happy memories can be really important at a certain stage in the journey of grief. As we close up this video now today, I do want to just give you some resources. If you do feel like you are needing some extra supports, there are supports available to help you. Again, normalizing that grief is natural, and we do want to give ourselves some time without trying to fast forward or bypass the normal feelings of grief. But if you do feel like you're into more of a complicated grieving and you feel like you might need some more supports, there are many options for supports available in NL Health and in some of our partnerships. So on this screen now, you can see some of our common resources available that we encourage people to know about and reach out to. In particular, I'll draw your attention to LifeWise, which was a peer support program that's available in the province. LifeWise has a warm line that's available for a good many hours of the day. I should have it in front of me, but I think it's until 11 o'clock in the evening most days of the week. So you can look up on Facebook or just Google LifeWise to get their number. And that will be a really great resource if you are feeling isolated, or maybe you don't feel like you have access to supports when you always need them. You may just want to have a chat with somebody. So you can call the warm line, or you can access their peer support groups that they have available. We also encourage people to access Bridge the Gap. Bridge the Gap has a whole bunch of knowledge centers on the website, and it also helps you to connect to many different resources available in our province. If you do feel like you'd like to talk to somebody one-on-one, one of the ways it's available all through the province is our Doorways clinics. So if you are whatever community you're in, you can simply Google your nearest kind of larger health center or hub area. So say, for example, Clarenville or Bonavista or Port-aux-Basques or St. Anthony, and Doorways, and you will find the information for your local Doorways clinic. You'll get the times that their hours are available and the phone number and the location for your Doorways clinic. So Doorways appointments are usually available pretty quickly, usually within a day or so, and are a great way to get connected. And sometimes we may only need 1 or 2 sessions to help us talk through and get some supports. And if we need more, then they can help us access other options. We also have online many programs that are available, and they can be done at your own pace and are self-directed. So therapist assisted online is sometimes we call it TAO for short. TAO is available on Bridge the Gap. So if you go on Bridge the Gap and look for TAO, that's another support that's available, as well as our online short programs. And MindWellU is also there as an online resource. So there's many different options available. You may or may not feel like you need these things, but sometimes even just knowing that they're available can be helpful to us in knowing that if we get to a point where we feel like our grief is becoming more complicated and it is impacting our day-to-day life, then knowing that we can reach out for services can help give us that sense of safety net beneath us. So I encourage you to feel free to reach out if you do need any of those things. So this closes up the recording on our session on coping with pet loss. I hope that this has been helpful for you in normalizing and understanding your own journey of grief. Again, just to clip, I just want to stress that it is really understandable if you've experienced a loss of a pet, that you would be experiencing many, many different emotions, and you may be feeling some struggle of moving on and doing your day-to-day activities that you would have been able to do before the loss of your pet. So give yourself that compassion and understanding as you're going through the loss, and feel free to reach out to supports in your family and friend circle, and also be a healthy support to yourself by writing and creating time for yourself to acknowledge the loss and to acknowledge the many beautiful things that your pet brought to you in your life. Thank you for your time and your interest in this session. And if you do have any questions from this session that you want to ask specifically about the presentation, you can contact the Provincial Groups Program by emailing nlgroups@nlhealthservices.ca. So again, it's nlgroups@nlhealthservices.ca. And I wish you all the best as you continue in your grief journey. And I have great hope that you will continue to navigate and get used to the new normal, which is not a pleasant normal, but the new normal of living life after your pet is no longer with you. Take good care of yourself, and if you feel inclined to look at any more of our videos, I welcome you to do that.